skeptical and you don't know for sure, then, well, why don't we just vote and find out and see if it does work, right? I guess proof's in the pudding, right? Again, today is the last day you can register to vote, and just a couple of minutes ago, the governor's Kansas debate started, and you can check out that link. It's posted on our Facebook page, and listen into that stream. I know I'm going to be tuning into it here in a little bit with the DVR features of YouTube. So if you can't catch it live right now, it'll be available later on in a recorded fashion. Your pizza time is 12:43. You're coming up on 12:43. We're still waiting for that correct mystery word on Words with the Listeners, brought to you by Pizza Time and the Kansas State Bank. Those are letters T, K, A, C, L, Y, E, 8. The first hint I gave you was an instrument to unlock an outer door of a house. Now your second hint is that they tingle in your pocket, and it starts with the letter L. Our mystery word starts with the letter L. Typically, they jingle in your pocket. There's enough of them. 785-242-1220. You've got about 7 minutes to get those guesses in. 785-242-1220. Started, and you can check out that link. It's posted on our Facebook page, and listen into that stream. I know I'm going to be tuning into it here in a little bit with the DVR features of YouTube. So if you can't catch it live right now, it'll be available later on in a recorded fashion. Your pizza time is 12:43. You're coming up on 12:43. We're still waiting for that correct mystery word on Words with the Listeners, brought to you by Pizza Time and the Kansas State Bank. Those are letters T, K, A, C, L, Y, E, 8. The first hint I gave you was an instrument to unlock an outer door of a house. Now your second hint is that they tingle in your pocket, and it starts with the letter L. Our mystery word starts with the letter L. Typically, they jingle in your pocket. There's enough of them. 785-242-1220. You've got about 7 minutes to get those guesses in. 785-242-1220. Marin Morris, Chris, 1KOFO.
And we did that because of the stellar school system and the good jobs and that strong sense of community that you find in Kansas like nowhere else. And my daughters did get a world-class education thanks to those great schools and those great teachers. And that's why I'm running for governor. I want to make sure that every Kansan, no matter who they are or where they live, have the same opportunities to succeed. Now, we all know that Kansas has gone through a world of hurt in the past 8 years. Doesn't matter where you look. You look at our schools, you look at our roads, you look at our economy, you look at our health care. It's all been devastated by the Brownback tax experiment. And now we have a very important choice. Do we end the experiment once and for all and continue on the road to recovery? Or do we hand the wheel to a man who has every intention of driving us back into the ditch? I have a strong record of bringing Republicans and Democrats together to solve problems, and I'll focus on getting our state back on track, focusing on schools and roads and jobs. It is time to slam the door on the Brownback experiment once and for all and go in a new direction.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Mr. Orman, 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. Over the next hour, we'll be debating policy. But when it comes to creating policy, the governor has 165 partners in the legislature. Where the governor stands alone is in managing and getting better performance out of this $17 billion enterprise we call the state of Kansas. I'm the only candidate on stage who has a track record to do that. I've spent my life in the private sector growing, managing, and improving companies, both large and small. I'm the only candidate running for governor who's managed a billion-dollar organization. I'm the only candidate who's created hundreds of jobs and made decisions on where to locate businesses and factories. Because of that experience, I've taken the time to develop a real plan to grow the Kansas economy. I've also been specific on where we can save money. The combination of those two things will allow us to invest in our priorities like career education, infrastructure, and health care without raising taxes. Senator Kelly has spent this campaign making lots of promises, but has no way to pay for them except to raise your taxes. She'll complain about Sam Brownback without mentioning the obvious similarities in their background. Two longtime legislators with little or no management experience. Secretary Kobach will talk about cutting government spending, returning to the Brownback tax experiment, and has an immigration plan that will decimate parts of our economy. I'm not for big government and high taxes. I'm not for starving the government. I want better government. I want government driven by common sense and results, and I have the track record to deliver it.
Thank you for your opening statements. Ms. Kelly, first question goes to you. Education has been on the legislative and the judicial agenda way too much in recent years. What's the matter with education in Kansas?
Well, to date, it's been underfunded for the past 8 years. You know, Sam Brownback made the largest cut to schools in Kansas history. We have changed that somewhat. You know, we overturned the Brownback tax experiment, working together in a bipartisan fashion. We were able to do that, and we have put ourselves back on the road to recovery and the road to funding our schools. You know, we presented the Supreme Court with a school finance plan, which they found acceptable, minus inflation. We have to add for that. We now, because of overturning the Brownback tax experiment, have the money in the bank to do that without raising taxes. We can take care of the inflation factor and then stay on the road to recovery, the road to funding our schools as we go forward.
Mr. Orman, 1 minute response.
You know, my wife is a public school teacher. She's taught in a Title I school in Kansas City, Kansas. My running mate, State Senator John Dahl, was a teacher and a coach for 20 years. The Orman-Dahl administration supports public education, but we also recognize that the solutions that we've been given oftentimes tend to be extremes. We're either going to go all the way to private school vouchers on the one hand, or on the other hand, we need to put billions of dollars more money into the top of the funnel. Neither of those are the right answers. We need targeted solutions. When we look at things like the achievement gap between low-income and high-income kids, 2/3 of it's caused by one thing, the summer learning deficit. We need more summer reading and more summer learning programs. Those aren't nearly as expensive as many of the other solutions. My wife also said something to me that I think is very important. The best education policy is a growing economy. A growing economy allows for parents to have good jobs so that they can invest more time in their kids' education. It ensures that kids don't have to work at convenience stores till 2 in the morning, that they come to school prepared and ready to learn. And I think we need to make sure we grow the economy to create that for them.
Mr. Kobach?
When it comes to education spending, we've been asking the wrong question. The question shouldn't be what is the bottom line dollar amount. It should be where are we spending the money. Do a quick math exercise. Take a classroom of 25 students. The average we spend per student is about $14,000. That's $350,000 spent on that classroom. Average teacher salary is $55,000. Let's say we're spending another $45,000, give or take, on books, computers, and classroom instruction materials. So that's $100,000 out of the $350,000 spent in the classroom. Where's the other $250,000 being spent? The answer is it's being spent on bloated administration and on unnecessary buildings the size of the Taj Mahal and administrative buildings. The problem is not the total amount we're spending, it's where the money is going. And that's why I have proposed a 75 cents of every dollar goes to classroom instruction requirement. Right now we're at about 53 cents of every dollar using the metric that I'm using. We have to get more money into the classroom. If we just keep shoveling money without seeing where it goes, we're going to get the same result.
Each candidate will have 30-second rebuttal, starting with you, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when we talk about the money that goes in the classroom, we need to look at how we're calculating that. So when you're talking about 75 cents of every dollar going into the classroom, I think you have to determine 75 cents of what and what are you spending that 75 cents on. But I can tell you that no matter what Chris Kobach says, the fact that he wants to take us back to the Brownback experiment ensures that our schools will be cut and underfunded forevermore.
Mr. Orman.
You know, I've heard it said by other campaigns that they're the education governor. In 14 years in Topeka, Senator Kelly hasn't spent a minute on the education committee. My running mate, however, State Senator John Dahl, actually was the vice chair of the education committee in his first term in the Senate. The Orman-Dahl administration is the administration that really cares deeply about public education and has proven it by their actions. In fact, I'm probably the only person on the stage who really has something invested in this because my two daughters are going to go through public schools in Kansas.
Over the past 20 years, total spending, state, federal, local, on K-12 education has more than doubled. Yet our test scores remain flat. So if we're spending all this money and increasing the amount we spend, yet we're not getting any improvement in test scores, we must not be spending the money in the right way. Now look at some other statistics. These are over the past 25 years, since 1993. The total number of students in Kansas, K-12, has gone up 10%. The total number of teachers in the system has gone up 17%. But the total number of administrators and managers has gone up 40%. That should give you a clue where the problem is.
Mr. Orman, the next question is for you. In your opening statement, you talked about taxes. So my guess is that there are very few people in this room who are willing to pay a lot more in taxes. But I also believe that there are very few people in this room who are willing to experience great reductions in much-needed governmental services. How will your administration balance the tax burden with the needed services burden of modern-day government?
Well, again, I think that's a false choice. I actually believe that if we grow the economy, and we've got a very detailed plan for doing that, it's available on our website, ormanforkansas.com, and we look at the areas where we're spending money inefficiently, we can do both. We can leave the tax burden the way it is and at the same time invest in our priorities. You know, I'll talk about just a couple of areas where we waste money in the state of Kansas. You know, we're engaged in a costly and expensive border war in Johnson County with Missouri. We spend money to recruit companies from their side of the state line road to ours. They spend money to recruit companies on our side. The Whole Family Foundation looked at this and said it was going to be $301,000 for every net new job created. Jerry Lopez, the CEO of AMC Theaters, said to me, look, when they moved to Kansas, it's stupid public policy, but I'd be stupid not to take the $45 million. We waste a lot of money by not negotiating prescription drug prices actively through the Medicaid program. We waste a lot of money in our criminal justice system. There are opportunities to cut spending and still deliver good results for the people of Kansas.
Thank you. 1 minute for you, Mr. Kobach.
I think you see a lot of contrast between the three of us on this question. Greg just said he would like to leave the tax burden the way it is and then presumably find ways to increase certain programs. Laura talks about massive increases in spending that will necessitate a tax increase. I'm talking about how we have to cut taxes right now. The $1.2 billion income tax hike of 2017 was a disaster, and that followed on the heels of a 2015 sales tax hike that moved us to the 8th highest sales taxes in America, 8th highest in the country. If you combine those two tax hikes together, the average family of four in Kansas is paying $900 a year more than what you were already paying in state income taxes and state sales taxes. This is a crushing tax burden. We are also the 15th highest in the country in mill levy rates. That's why I have been saying we have to reduce the tax burden. We have to put a 2% cap on appraisal increases to give people property tax relief. We have to pass along the $137 million in the Trump tax windfall that the state could easily do. And we have to give relief on sales taxes.
Ms. Kelly?
You know, I want to reiterate something I said in my opening statement. You know, we all know what a world of hurt we've been through these past 6, 7, 8 years, and that was a direct result of the Brownback tax experiment. That is what Chris Kobach wants to go back to. There are ways, now that we've overturned that experiment and we've put ourselves on the road to recovery, we've been experiencing revenues over estimates for the last 16 months. There are ways to move forward and balance our budget and fund our schools and other infrastructure projects without increasing our taxes. There's no need to do that now. We need to wait until the middle of next year to have some much better idea about where we are, the impact of the state tax cuts, the impact of the federal thing, to see where we are. But what it's looking like right now is that we can stay on a road to growth and economic development without increasing taxes.
Mr. Orman, 30 seconds.
Well, you know, no one likes to pay taxes. I get that. And it would be great if I could stand up here and talk like Secretary Kobach does about how we're going to return money to the people of Kansas. But the facts are we've got a $9 billion unfunded pension liability. It would be irresponsible not to start to address that if we had additional dollars available to us. And by the way, not all of that unfunded liability came on Brownback's watch. In fact, the vast majority of the unfunded liability came during Kathleen Sebelius's tenure as governor of the state of Kansas. And so I just think we need to be responsible, and we cannot burden future generations with that.
30 seconds, Mr. Kobach.
We have to recognize that these high taxes we face, higher than all of the surrounding states around us, are having a consequence. We are one of only 3 states that did not grow. We had negative economic growth in 2017. The others were the economic basket case of Louisiana and the high regulatory state of Connecticut. We should not be in their company. We should be in the company of the 4 states surrounding us that are experiencing very good, robust economic growth. We are now 46th in the country in 2018 in economic growth. If you ask CEOs, as the Kansas Policy Institute did, what is the #1 factor hindering their growth? It is high taxes.
30 seconds, Ms. Kelly.
In addition to seeing revenue over estimates in the past 15, 16 months, we've also seen our economy growing because we overturned those tax cuts. As I'm looking forward, I want to stabilize the budget without increasing taxes, and then we need to look at reducing sales tax on food, and we also need to look at providing property tax relief. Our property taxes are completely out of whack. So there's a lot of work to do. I think we can do it. We need to put a good team together to chart a path to lowering that food sales tax and providing relief on property taxes.
Question number 3. Mr. Kobach, it has been proven around the world that labor follows opportunity. As I look at the Kansas labor force with an anecdotal eye, it's easy for me to see technology experts, doctors, and others from other countries, but I also see roofers, pavers, and hotel workers from other countries. How do you balance the labor needs of business and industry with the concerns related to immigration?
The key is we need legal immigration, not illegal immigration. Whenever you have illegal immigration, it comes in and depresses the wages in whatever industry it is in, so that the U.S. citizens who are still in that industry and the legal aliens who are in that industry experience reduced wages. So if we're talking about keeping wages high for hardworking Kansas, we've got to address the illegal immigration problem. And unfortunately, Kansas has been encouraging more illegal immigration. We give $377 million a year in welfare and other public benefits to illegal aliens. We also reward illegal immigration with in-state tuition benefits. And in addition, we have several sanctuary counties in the state of Kansas. I will address all 3 problems, and I will also, as an executive order, compel every business that receives a state contract to use E-Verify, so that if we're using state money to finance the building of a road or a building, not 1 penny is going to the wages of an illegal alien. We need to be looking out for our hardworking Kansans first and for those who follow the law when they come here.
Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. I think everyone here and across the country would agree that our immigration laws are broken. We need a comprehensive immigration reform plan. That can only come from Congress. I will work with our congressional delegation to encourage, to push them to work in a bipartisan fashion and get that done. It is critical to the Kansas economy that we have available to us immigrant labor that can fill so many of the jobs in our agricultural and our manufacturing industries. I've spent a lot of time with farmers and ranchers out west. I understand how critical that immigrant labor is to their very ability to function. We have got to come up with a solution, and we need to do it now.
Mr. Orma.
You know, it's clear we have a workforce issue in the state of Kansas. And frankly, if we adopted Secretary Kobach's policies around immigration, it would decimate literally parts of our economy in the state, and it would have a follow-through effect throughout our whole economy, our tax base, et cetera. I've been clear from the beginning, we need an immigration policy that's tough, practical, and fair. By tough, I mean we need secure borders. Of course we do. But we also have to be practical. We're not going to find and deport 11 million people, nor would that be humane or economically advisable. So how do we make it fair to taxpayers? I say if you're here on an undocumented basis, you should have to register with ICE by a date certain. You should have to perform community service or pay a small fine as an acknowledgement that a law has been broken. But then if you hold down a job, you pay your taxes, you obey our laws, you should be able to stay here and work. You know, I've spent a lot of time in western Kansas. I was at Pokey Farms. When I heard Joe Morgan, the guy who runs that business, say, I've grown this company for 35 years. This is the first year I've had to shrink it because I can't get people to work on my farms. I've talked to people who are trying to get the grain out of the fields right now who can't do it because they can't get labor. It would be devastating to do what Secretary Kobach wants to do.
30 seconds, Mr. Kobach.
Let me focus on the word Greg uses of devastating. President Trump has been implementing an immigration policy on which I have advised him on several points throughout the campaign and the transition period and during the presidency. And the economic situation in the United States is not devastated, is it? We've seen a significant reduction in illegal immigration, and yet our economy is thriving. One of the reasons that is the case is that illegal aliens consume a much higher percentage of welfare benefits. 71% of illegal alien-headed households, 71%, use some form of welfare benefit. So you're bringing in people very poor from poor parts of the world, and they come into a welfare state. We taxpayers end up paying the bill.
Ms. Kelly?
Yeah, you know, Chris again is talking about the welfare benefits that immigrants receive, illegal immigrants receive. The fact of the matter is they are not eligible for welfare benefits. They cannot get cash assistance. They cannot get Medicaid expansion. They cannot get any of those kinds of things that he's talking about. We need to deal with the problem comprehensively. We need to work with our congressional delegation. We've got to get this settled once and for all for the benefit of our industries, our agriculture, and just the country as a whole.
Mr. Orman?
You know, again, if you look at the number of illegal immigrants when President Trump took office and you look at the number today, they're roughly the same. We haven't been pushing them out of our country. That's not what's driving economic growth in the United States. Practically speaking, you have to understand the way our industries work in this state. 47% of Kansas is dependent on the agricultural economy. If we take the approach that Secretary Kobach is talking about, the facts and statistics notwithstanding that he'd like to share, we are going to devastate the economy in western Kansas.
Next question. We'll start with you, Ms. Kelly. We operate in a global economy. How will your administration get global business and industry to move to Kansas?
Well, again, I would, one, work with our congressional delegation to make sure that they are representing Kansans when we're talking about stuff like trade and tariffs. That's absolutely essential. We have to recognize the impact that those kinds of policies have on our entire state. You know, I can remember the days when the governor acted as an ambassador for the state and traveled internationally, taking business leaders and our Department of Commerce across the waters to work directly with our foreign countries to develop our trade that was specific and relevant to Kansas. We need to have that again. You know, we have, over time, like everything else, decimated our Department of Commerce and our ability to partner with our business community to grow that. We need to add that back to what we do as partners at the state government level.
Mr. Orman.
You know, again, I'm the only candidate on the stage who has any real meaningful private sector experience. I would look to grow the Kansas economy and attract those overseas businesses the same way I'd look to grow any of my businesses. First, by saying, what are our strengths? What are the things we can leverage? We're at the geographic center of the United States at a time when our economy is quickly moving from a bricks and mortar to a distributed economy. We should be the distribution capital of America. We have 3 Class 1 railroads that travel through the state, access to low-cost manufacturing inputs, abundant renewable energy. We should be the intermodal manufacturing capital of America. But we have to have policies that support the underlying development of those industries. That means we have to invest in our infrastructure, and it means we have to have a regulatory regime in Kansas at the local, county, and state level that supports the development of those industries. We also have to focus on workforce development. I actually think great companies follow great workforces, not the other way around. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about how we can plug the gaps in our career and tech ed financing system, and we've proposed a 33% tax credit for public-private partnerships to develop workforce in conjunction with our community and technical colleges.
1 minute, Mr. Kobach.
Ms. Kelly talks about the governor being an ambassador to sell Kansas to businesses. Well, it's really hard to sell Kansas when you are in a situation like this. Come to our great state. We have great people. We have lots of wonderful things to do in Kansas and a great culture here. Oh, by the way, we have the highest taxes in the 5-state area. And oh, by the way, we also have the highest electricity rates in the 5-state area. 13.4 cents per kilowatt hour for residential here. The average in the state surroundings is 10.9%. 10.9 cents per kilowatt hour. That's almost 25% higher. That is a big portion of a company's bottom line. In some companies, it is the largest chunk of the company's bottom line. You need a governor who's going to try to address both of those numbers. In order to sell Kansas, the numbers have to add up for that company, and right now they're not adding up. On top of that, you need to cut regulations too. Now, the taxes and the electricity rates are the biggest factors. But if we can reduce regulations, there are some occupation licensing and other types of licensing that we should either waive or make it from an annual to a biannual licensing process. Let's reduce the burdens on businesses, then they will come.
30 seconds, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. Businesses come to a state that has a great quality of life, a good education system, and a trained workforce. Kansas needs to put back in place the fundamentals of economic development. We've got to fund our schools from early childhood through our higher and tech ed programs. We have got to reinvest in our infrastructure, whether we're talking roads or we're talking broadband, and we've got to expand Medicaid. That would provide health care access not only to 150,000 new Kansans, but it would also grow our economy and grow jobs.
Well, let's face it, we've also got a reputational deficit. I've talked to CEOs who've said they're insourcing jobs, great jobs, but they're locating them in other states because they can't get people to move to Kansas. You know, William Allen White once said, when anything's going to happen in America, it happens first in Kansas. All the big political movements started here. Prohibition, populism, the bull moose. It's safe to say the issue that brought our nation to the brink of the Civil War was whether or not Kansas would be admitted as a free state. We used to lead. Now we're a cautionary tale. We need to change that. We need to get the press to start not writing stories about what's right about Kansas, not what's the matter with Kansas.
Let me address two things that my opponents just said. Ms. Kelly said that we need to expand Medicaid to bring businesses to Kansas. That makes no sense whatsoever. Expanding Medicaid will not bring new businesses in. Expanding state expenditures is a Keynesian idea from almost 100 years ago, and it does not produce a massive increase in growth. Then Greg's point about the reputational deficit. I'll agree there is a reputational deficit, but I'd be blowing smoke if I could tell you that as governor, I will suddenly change what the reporters in this room write, or I will change what people think in New York or California or Texas about Kansas. Let's just make it a good place for businesses to grow.
Okay, so now for a little bit of a fun question. All right, national politics seems to be on the lips and on the fingertips of the American public almost minute by minute. Mr. Orman, starting with you, will you use Twitter during your administration? And feel free to take as much liberty with that question as you would like.
Yeah, look, I think we need to figure out ways to continue to communicate with voters. I'm not a very prolific tweeter, but I do tweet occasionally. Look, the first plan that we came out with when I decided to run was our transparency, effectiveness, and accountability plan. I do think we need to open up the governor's office to the people of Kansas. I don't believe I'm going to do that through Twitter. I think ultimately what we've talked about is, number one, having weekly office hours for the governor, where anybody who wants to talk to the governor has the ability to come in and make an appointment. I'd like to do weekly legislative breakfasts where the people's representatives have the opportunity to come in. I don't care if they disagree with me on policy. Frankly, I think intellectual conflict's a good thing. It's how I run my businesses. And so I want to open up the governor's office in that way. And I want to do monthly town hall meetings across the state so that every Kansan has the ability to talk to me, to hold us accountable for accomplishing results for the people of Kansas.
Mr. Kobach.
I'm not sure if I'll be doing any tweeting. I do a minimal amount now. In fact, my staff does it for me most of the time, occasionally with my approval. But I think that's the key question is how open will the governor be in sharing his or her ideas and sharing his or her thoughts about policy and reacting to things that are happening. I am very open. Many of you know I write a column roughly weekly for Breitbart and talk about all kinds of political issues. I think it's important to know where your governor stands on things. And I think the members of the press corps here would agree that as Secretary of State, I've been more open than ever, more accessible than your average statewide official in terms of doing interviews. I take every interview I can. I show up for in-camera interviews whenever it's possible. I think having that openness is important. And I'll tell you one more thing, too. It's part of leadership. I think if you have a governor, and we've had governors in the past who have been reactive, they wait in their office for something to happen. When the press asks, what's your position on this issue? They say, well, the legislature's working on something. I'll look at it when it comes to my desk. No, the governor should say, this is what I'd like to see, this is my vision, and this is the bill I'd like to see passed.
1 minute response, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. Well, I would tweet, except my staff took my phone away from me, so... they were using the example of others and worried, but no, yes, I do tweet, but my topics are different and probably not nearly as controversial as the ones you're thinking of, Eugene. So, but I think my style of leadership lends itself to openness. I have always worked in a very collaborative way with folks, and I will continue to do that, whether it's my legislative colleagues or it's the general public or it's advocacy groups or whatever. They know in a Kelly administration they will have a place at the table. They will be part of the discussion. They will be part of the decision-making process, and I think that's the way Kansans want it, and that's the way it will be under a Kelly administration.
30-second response, Mr. Orman, and just know that the media are tweeting.
Right. Understood. Well, look, I think the other thing we need transparency around is transparency of results. We shouldn't find out about things not going well at our state government because some journalist did a great investigative report. We should be reporting on ourselves. It's one of the reasons I've called for an annual report card for every one of our state agencies. We need the people of Kansas to know, are they getting results for the dollars that they're entrusting the state of Kansas with? So we should have clear objectives. We should report on our progress against those objectives. And if we're failing, if we're letting the people of Kansas down, we should take remedial action to fix it and fix it right away.
One of the most important areas I'll be pushing for transparency is in our legislature. Did you know that we are one of very few states in America that does not record committee votes? As a result, if you want to know how your representative or senator voted on an issue, you have to be present in the room watching their lips move when there's an aye or a nay vote. That's outrageous. How can you hold your representative accountable when you're at home trying to figure it out on the Internet? How did they vote on this? Well, you can't figure it out on the Internet unless somebody was watching their lips move. We have got to have better accountability, and that comes through transparency so you can know what your representatives are doing.
Ms. Kelly?
Thank you. As the leader of the executive branch, one of my first orders of business will be to eliminate our no-bid contract process. We're spending almost $500 million right now on contracts that were never open for bid, that were conducted in the back room behind closed doors. We need to shine the sunlight on those and make sure that they are in the best interest of Kansans. My guess is that many of them are not, and we will change that.
Okay. Next question. Mr. Kobach, the term reaching across the aisle is used to denote a collaborative approach to governing. How open are you to reaching across the aisle?
I'm very open to it. I think people sometimes assume that because I'm a very principled conservative and there are many issues on which I'm not going to yield. For example, I'm pro-life, and that's just where I stand on the question. On issues like guns, I believe our Second Amendment is absolutely essential to our safety, and it's essential to our tradition and our Constitution. So there are some issues like that where there is a defined position, and I will not move. But there are other issues. For example, when I push for tax cuts, certainly I'll be reaching across the aisle and perhaps reaching over to Democrats and saying, well, look, if we want to cut the sales tax this far, maybe we can cut the sales tax on food even farther. Can I get a few Democrat votes by doing that? Or when we look at budgeting of agencies, this agency I've managed to shrink through natural attrition this far. This agency I've only managed to shrink it this far. But can we get some agreement that maybe this program over here isn't that effective? So there are many, many areas where we can reach across the aisle, and I will reach across the aisle. There are certain matters, areas of principle, where I simply believe what is right, and I think the majority of Kansans agree with me what is right on issues like that. But on most issues, indeed most run-of-the-mill bills, I think there is room to reach across the aisle.
Ms. Kelly?
14 years in the state Senate, I have established a reputation of reaching across the aisle and around the room in order to bring people together to solve problems. I don't know any other way to conduct business. So you can rest assured that when I'm in the governor's office, that not only will I reach out to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I'll be bringing them into the room to discuss policies and where we need to go. I also have every intention of creating a very bipartisan cabinet and other appointments across the state because I want to practice what I've been preaching and what I've been doing for the past 14 years. The only way we solve problems in Kansas is to work together. There is absolutely no room for polarization and division. We've got to come together. We have very critical problems that need our attention over the next few years to put our state back together. I need to work with my other colleagues to get that done.
Mr. Orman.
Well, this is one of the areas where being an independent's a real advantage. By definition, any extended hand by me is reaching across an aisle. Ultimately, as an independent, I think it liberates me to serve Kansans in ways that no other governor can. I understand we've heard people talk here about working with the other side, but the reality is that tends to be the exception, not the norm in government today. In government today, an idea advanced by Democrats is often dead on arrival with Republicans and vice versa. I don't particularly care who the author of an idea is. I care whether or not it's a good idea. By the same token, as an independent, I also can appoint the best and the brightest people to serve in my cabinet. I don't have to pick from a group of politically loyal Democrats or politically loyal Republicans. I can make the decision based on competence, not based on political loyalty. And I think when we see things like 75 kids go missing at DCF, it becomes real clear what happens when you make appointment decisions on the basis of ideological purity and not on the basis of competence.
30 seconds.
Let me give you a short example of where I recently reached across the aisle. Our workers' compensation system in Kansas is very employer-friendly, indeed one of the probably top three most employer-friendly in the country. But the legislature recently made a change that actually gave some workers zero compensation, zero for their permanent impairment, for their injury. I went to the legislature and said, not only is this unfair, it's unconstitutional. Many Democrats were looking at me saying, what is he doing talking about protecting the worker? But that's exactly what I was doing. But the strange part is the Democrats recoiled and said, oh, if Kobach's for it, then we can't get on board. It's a two-way street. They've got to be willing to work together, too.
30 seconds, Ms. Conlon.
Thank you. spent months now listening to Greg talk about how the parties don't work together, and that's why you need to elect somebody of no party. The fact of the matter is, in Kansas, the parties have always worked together. You know, it takes 21 votes to pass a bill in the Senate. Senate Democrats have never had that number, but neither have moderate Republicans. The way we formed a moderate majority and moved positive policy forward is by working together. That's how we've always done it, and that is the way we will continue to do it.
Mr. Orman.
Well, Senator, that may be your belief in Topeka, but when you travel the state and you talk to people, they're sick and tired of the fighting. And what I hear from them is it's sad that we have to get to the point of a crisis before we work with the other side. Now, I'll acknowledge you've worked with the other side before. On the voter ID bill, you supported Secretary Kobach. On the constitutional carry amendment, you were a co-sponsor. You even voted against Medicaid expansion, along with all of your Republican colleagues. So I think there are examples of you working across the aisle, but it's generally when it's in the best interest of your reelection, not in the best interest of Kansans.
Next question. In Kansas, there is concern that access to affordable mental health care, as well as just health care in general, has been hampered by the state's fiscal issues and policy decisions. How do you respond to this concern, Mr. Kobach?
I think, did I just...
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you were last, so it's you. Yeah, I'm sorry, Ms. Kelly.
Well, this is right in my wheelhouse. You know, I actually started my career in mental health, working in a state psychiatric facility for children for 7 years. I recognize fully that Kansas has a crisis in mental health right now, and that's having come from being a model mental health state that many others looked to in the 80s. We have dismantled all of that. I've been working with mental health advocates now for the past 2 years and putting together a comprehensive strategic plan to put back in place the kinds of the continuum of services that we need here. We've made some progress on that this past year when we funded regional crisis centers rather than pouring more money into state hospitals that are remote and far away from people. They need to be receiving those services in their communities, near their families, near their work. So I will continue that work as I'm governor to ensure that we fill in the gaps in mental health and with a particular focus on the mental health needs of our school children.
Mr. Orman.
You know, this is another area where Kansas used to lead. We used to be looked to as a model for how we handle mental health in this nation. And now, again, we've fallen behind. I actually own some mental health facilities. I realize in studying mental health that the best model tends to be not large state institutions, but regional care, because then people get mental health care in their own communities where they have their support networks around them. And ultimately, they get better faster and they stay better. They stay well. And I think that's important for us to focus on programs that actually get results. You know, one of the things, however, that one of my partners was told by a local sheriff was that while we may own mental health facilities, he has more mental health patients in his county jail than we do in institutions that are actually trained in how to deal with mental health patients. And so ultimately, I think this is another area where we're being penny wise and pound foolish at the state level, and the burden is falling on cities and counties now through the criminal justice system, and that's what's leading to increases in things like property taxes.
30 seconds. I'm sorry. You get to respond.
Yeah. I'll agree with Mr. Orman on that last response in terms of the jails being used as de facto facilities, or at least holding places for people who suffer from some of these disabilities. This is a perfect example of where the situation in Topeka has been, they've been idling when they should have been moving forward. There's a plan that's been sitting on the table in the legislature to expand Osawatomie and significantly increase the number of beds for people who are mentally ill, and it would involve privatizing it as well in a way that would actually not increase the state's total outlays every year. So we could expand the number of beds and not have, as taxpayers, to spend more money to do it. That should have been signed last year. The legislature should have been pushing for that last year. That's something we can do right away. I think we need to look at outside of the box to solve these problems. Briefly looking at regular health care, I've been talking about direct primary care, which actually here in Wichita has seen huge success, where people pay $50 a month for unlimited primary visits to their doctor. We need to be taking that model and trying it in CanCare, and I'll be using a pilot project to try that out.
30 seconds, Ms. Keller.
Yeah, thank you. When Chris Kobach talks about that primary care, what he's talking about is concierge care, which really works until you get sick. If you get cancer, you break your leg, then it does not work. You'll be in a world of hurt. But as we go back to talking about the mental health system, expanding Osawatomie is exactly the wrong direction to take right now. We know that we cannot recruit folks down there, and we have a huge waiting list because they don't have the staff to take care of folks. We need to go back and develop our regional crisis centers where we can recruit staff and it can be close by to patients and their families.
The other thing we can't forget here is the connection between substance use disorders and mental health. And in that regard, I think we need to also focus on getting ahead of the opioid crisis in Kansas. There are other states who are much further along and they're addressing in the progression of this disease. We have a detailed health care plan that's available on our website at ormondforkansas.com where we address specifically what we need to do to get ahead of the opioid crisis so that we can also prevent further movement of people into our mental health system as well.
30 seconds.
This is not the first time I've heard Ms. Kelly say that direct primary care doesn't work if you get sick. That's incorrect. You go to the doctor if you are sick, and the doctor will actually dispense the medicine directly to you at a tiny fraction of the cost. If you are seriously in need of help, maybe you've been in a debilitating accident or something like that, you do have a very high deductible in the private marketplace, a very high deductible insurance policy to cover those situations. In the CanCare situation, you would still have a top level of that kind of acute medical service to be provided. But the garden variety medical service, 90% of what people get would be done more cheaply and in a more satisfactory way.
Okay, next question, kind of a philosophical question and a little bit of direction for this one, okay? There will be 3 terms that will be tossed out, and Mr. Orman, since you get to go first on this, you will choose whatever term you like, and then the 2 terms that are left, you guys will get a chance to choose those, okay? All right? All right? So, it goes like this. 2 men and 1 woman walk into a Kansas bar for a drink. One is named Hindsight, one is named Insight, and the other is named Foresight. Starting with you, Mr. Orman. As you sit together and sip on a beer, which one are you and why?
Interesting question. I'm going to say I'm Foresight, because at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is create a Kansas where all our children and grandchildren feel inspired to build their lives. And to do that, we need to do something dramatically different in the state. We've heard about the failed Brownback experiment, but the truth is the trends in Kansas have been difficult for 2 decades. We were the 8th healthiest state in the nation in 1991. We're the 25th healthiest state in the nation when Sam Brownback took office. We had a pension fund that was $2 billion underfunded when Governor Sebelius took office. It's $9 billion underfunded today. Median household income in Kansas peaked in 2003, the first year of Governor Sebelius' term, at $57,700. Think about that. The average Kansan hasn't seen a pay increase in almost 15 years. We need to do things dramatically different in Kansas if we want to get better results and if we want to make this place a place that all our children and grandchildren will be proud to call home.
So, Mr. Kobach, Foresight has left the building. Are you Hindsight or are you Insight?
This is even better than what book would you have on a desert island. It's all right, I guess I'm going to go with Insight then. Because insight means that you're looking at a problem and you have some perspective, some insight into why the problem is occurring, and you're perhaps offering a different point of view. You're not thinking superficially about it, but you're looking below as to what the root cause is. So, for example, we hear this superficial statement often from Ms. Kelly about, oh, the Brownback experiment failed, Brownback experiment. But she doesn't define what the experiment is. Well, the failure, if there was one, was the failure to balance the budget. Spending did not come down. And so the insight is you have to cut spending. We have the superficial talk about how CanCare is not well received and we have to do something different. But you can't take the solution of just taking it back into government. That's not going to make it better. Nobody says, oh, good, a government bureaucrat's going to be doing something for me. I can't wait for that. No, you have to look at why people are dissatisfied. What is it about the CanCare system that isn't right? And people are saying, I didn't like this, I didn't like that. You have to have insight into the problem. When you look at why our schools are failing, you have to have insight into what could give people a better motivation. One of the things proposal I've offered is let's give everybody a raise. Everybody from the teachers to the janitors if performance increases.
Ms. Kelly, your thoughts about hindsight?
Yeah, thanks for the option. But actually, I think it's sort of fitting because I'm the only one on the stage who has lived through the last 8 years and seen the devastation that has occurred in our state to our schools and to our roads and to our healthcare system, our foster care system. I've been there on the front lines fighting against it, but also watching what's happening. And so that historical perspective, having been there, I know where the problems are in the state of Kansas, and I know what we need to do to get them fixed. And I've got the relationships already established in the legislature and across the state to move us forward as we go forward and stay on the road to recovery.
Mr. Orman, you are back at the table with a new beer of foresight. 30 seconds.
Well, the only thing I would say in rebuttal here is, suggesting you're the only one who lived through the past 8 years is sort of a very Topeka-centric view of things. The reality is Kansans have been struggling. Kansans have been hurting. And having traveled the state, having talked to thousands of Kansans, I have a lot of insight into why they are struggling. So if we want to make this state a place where our kids and our grandkids are proud to call home, we have to do things dramatically different. And I think if you go to my website, I've been promoting it all night, ormanforkansas.com, you'll see we have the best ideas, the most forward-thinking ideas to move the state forward.
Mr. Insight.
Well, I think I'll agree with Mr. Forsythe on this one. Just because you've been in the legislature in Topeka, it doesn't mean you have special knowledge. In fact, I would say that if you've spent that much time in the legislature, you may be part of the problem. And I think that's what we're looking at right here. We have to change the way things are happening right now in Topeka. And I appreciate Greg's point of view that he wants to bring changes too. I do as well. The current way things are cruising along in the legislature is not solving the problems. You need a governor who will come in, be able to mobilize a majority of the legislature behind his or her point of view, and bring change, not just simply point at problems and say, wow, isn't that bad?
Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. I think we have to just deal with the reality of Kansas as it is now. We have put ourselves back on the road to recovery, but we have a very long way to go. And we need somebody who is strong and steady and experienced, who knows government, who knows where the issues are. This is not the time for a rookie to come in and not have the skills and the relationships to be able to get to work on day one. We have no time to waste.
Okay, this will be the final formal question before we do the closing statements and stuff, okay? So, question comes to you, Mr. Kobach. From your perspective, what are the 3 primary issues that Kansans should be concerned with?
I outlined them in my introduction. The first one is our high tax burden, and we've talked extensively about that. We have the highest taxes in the 5-state area. That is a huge problem. The second issue is illegal immigration. We've talked a little bit about that one. Look, if one of the problems that we have all recognized, or at least I believe Mr. Orman mentioned it, is we do have stagnant wages in Kansas. When you have illegal immigration depressing wages, that is a problem. And you could say, wow, that this labor is great for our economy, but when the labor comes in at such a low wage, and then we taxpayers are forced to pay $377 million in welfare benefits, then we are effectively subsidizing the low-wage labor. But the third issue is culture of corruption. Now, part of that is getting rid of the unrecorded committee votes, but I'll also be pushing for term limits in Kansas. We're one of relatively few states west of the Mississippi that doesn't have term limits. I believe that you need an infusion of new blood into politics. Nobody is so indispensable that they need to stay in their legislative seat for 16, 20 years. That's another new idea that we need to have.
Ms. Kelly?
I'll go back to the fundamentals. We know we have to fund our schools. We have to fund our infrastructure, roads and broadband, and we've got to expand Medicaid. From that base, we can then look at other methods of developing our economy, which we have got to do if we're going to grow as a state, if we're going to sustain our services as a state. I want to look back at the Kansas Bioscience Authority, which was put in place about 15 years ago. It was one of the most brilliant economic structures ever put in place. We went from nowhere on the bioscience industry radar to the 5th fastest growing state in the country. That was disbanded to pay for the tax experiment. We had a health policy authority that oversaw our Medicaid programs, which have since been farmed out to 3 out-of-state for-profit insurance companies, so that any savings that we're seeing are going to 3 other places, not staying here in the state of Kansas to either provide additional services or to return to the taxpayer. We've got a lot of work to do.
Mr. Orman.
Kansas faces a demographic challenge. Our state's aging at a far faster rate than the rest of the nation. In fact, 82 out of 105 counties in Kansas have depopulated since the turn of the century. So first and foremost, we need to grow the Kansas economy if we are going to be in a position to provide the jobs and opportunities that keep our kids here and be in a position to provide for what will be an increasingly dependent population. The second priority we have is to protect the pillars of our communities, which I refer to as our public schools, our critical access and regional hospitals, and our infrastructure. What I realize from traveling throughout the state of Kansas is if we lose any of those, we lose a number of Kansas communities, and that's just not acceptable to me. Finally, we need to make Kansas government the most transparent, effective, and accountable government in the nation. I've got a plan for that, but it relies heavily on my private sector experience. And I will say that I think my experience, my background of creating jobs and opportunities for people, balancing budgets, dealing with rising health care costs, dealing with the impact of regulations, is far better preparation for the job of governor than someone who's been a lifetime career partisan politician.
30 seconds, Mr. Kobach.
I'd like to address Ms. Kelly's comment about the highways. We do have good highways. They're number 2 in the country, but they're rapidly going to drop in the ranking because we haven't been spending enough maintaining them. And we have been robbing $600 billion a year, $600 billion over the past several years from the highway fund. And it's the legislature that's been doing it. Because of their tax and spend habits, they are just simply continuing to spend, and we're hearing more proposals to continue to increase other government programs. Meanwhile, we take the money out of the highway fund. You've got to have a governor that is willing to, through attrition, cut other government programs so that we can stop robbing the highway fund. We've got to look after our roads.
30 seconds, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. I agree. Think the other thing I'd like to reference in terms of really growing our state and moving it forward is that we've talked a bit about branding here tonight, or this afternoon actually, just feels like night in here. The fact of the matter is, Kansas's reputation has suffered significantly over the past 8 years. We need to reverse that, and we need to reverse that by ensuring that we don't pass policies that companies see as regressive and not business friendly. We will work on that very hard in a Kelly administration.
Mr. Orman.
I actually agree with Secretary Kobach in terms of the need to be more efficient with our government. But I don't think we do that just simply by attrition. I think we do that by looking at where we spend money and figuring out, are we getting results for the dollars we're spending? And if we're not, we have to make changes. Look, if we don't grow the Kansas economy, if we aren't more efficient with the dollars we're spending in the state of Kansas, we are not going to have the money to fund any of our priorities, public schools, career and technical education, healthcare, infrastructure, without raising taxes. That's what I want to do for the state of Kansas.
As I mentioned when we started this event, we drew numbers for the opening and also for the closing. And so we are at the point where we will do closing statements. Mr. Kobach, you will get to go first. Mr. Orman, you will get to go second. And Ms. Kelly, you will get to close us out.
Listening to Ms. Kelly this afternoon, it seems like she wants to run against Sam Brownback and not run against me. But what's funny about that is on 3 of the biggest issues of this campaign, she shares the Brownback position and I oppose it. First, on government spending. Under Brownback, as I mentioned, spending went through the roof, and she has laid out today how she would like to continue to increase spending, whereas I'll be cutting it. Second, on sales taxes. Brownback supported and signed a record sales tax increase in 2015, and during that year, Laura Kelly supported a proposal that would have raised it even higher to 6.85%. And third, on illegal immigration. Governor Brownback had no appetite to curb the illegal immigration problem in Kansas, and neither does Laura Kelly, whereas I disagree. So the real question here is, will the real Sam Brownback please stand up? If you like the status quo, you like the way things are going, don't vote for me. Vote for one of my opponents. In fact, I guarantee that if one of them wins, you will see nothing change. The reason you will see nothing change is because there will be gridlock for 4 years. The Republican legislature will pass a bill, and then our more liberal governor will veto it. Pass a bill, veto it. On and on and on. But if you actually want to see change, if you want to see government moving in concert in a bold new direction, then I suggest you vote for me. We will bring the tax relief that our state needs. We will do something about sanctuary counties and tuition for illegal aliens. We will push for term limits. It's time for a change, and I hope you agree with me, and I humbly ask you for your vote.
90 seconds to you, Mr. Orman.
Over the last year, I've had the pleasure to meet thousands of Kansans. I've learned a lot as I've traveled the state. I've heard from many of you that you believe I would be the best governor, that I have the background you want, the best plans, and the vision to make Kansas the leader it once was. But I know there are other voices out there telling you to be afraid. They're telling you not to vote for the best candidate because that might somehow help the candidate you fear the most. Let's be clear. A vote for me is not a vote for Kelly or a vote for Kobach. A vote for Greg Orman is a vote for Kansas. A vote for me is a vote for a different path and a better future. We don't have to choose fear and hate. We don't have to vote for a bad candidate just to avoid a worse one. Kansans deserve better. If we continue to support the same tired political candidates, we are going to get the same tired results. Stagnant wages, skyrocketing health care costs, a broken state budget, and our children and grandchildren leaving the state. If we want to get back on track, we need new leadership. We can chart a new course. We can reject the broken politics of today and show the rest of America what's right about Kansas. Kansas can be a leader again, but I need your help and I need your courage. Reject the fear that the major parties are selling you. Remember, it's never wrong to vote for the right candidate. And today I stand here asking for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Ms. Kelly, 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you for hosting us today. It's been great. This is a very, very pivotal election. The stakes have never been higher, and the choices have never been clearer. We can either go backward and repeat the devastation of the last 8 years under Sam Brownback, or we can elect a governor who will work like the devil to rebuild our state. Chris Kobach has promised to bring back the Brownback tax experiment and cut even more. That means cuts to our schools, cuts to our roads, cuts to our health care. Kansas needs a strong, steady, experienced leader who can get to work on day one, working with other people to resolve the problems facing our state. I'm the only candidate in this race who has spent her entire career working to improve the lives of others, particularly working men and women. I have been working towards solutions every day of my career, and not solutions that benefit me, but solutions that actually help Kansas families. That's why I have the support of Republicans and Democrats alike, including former Governor Bill Graves, former U.S. Senator Nancy Kassenbaum. And as your governor, I will continue to bring people together to fix this mess and rebuild Kansas. I am Laura Kelly, and I ask for your vote on November 6th.
Mr. Orman, Ms. Kelly, Mr. Kobach, these are your candidates for Kansas governor. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all.
I want to thank our candidates for participating today. I hope you leave with more information than what you have. I want to thank all of you for coming and being a part of this. And I want you to be safe going home, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.
That's all, folks.